a fantastic transition into the next. We're debriefing this whole process. And can you give a specific example you can think of during this where you were like, oh, I'm glad I had?
I mean, I feel very limited in my own observations and my own ability to be critical of my work, but specific examples. I mean, so many people said stuff, and I'm like, oh yeah, that's good. I didn't notice that, or that is a very insightful point, Cameron. I didn't, and it's just the two heads are better than one on this type of reflection.
I also think like the fact that we didn't know anything about the student means that we are going to have a different perspective than Sam, because yeah, I mean like when you see a kid every day and you're like emotionally wrapped up in their academic achievement or whatever, personal achievement, then it's harder to see like their work objectively.
I'm also interested in this as sort of an artifact that is like a snapshot in time, and not, hearing that little bit about the fact that this is probably a second draft or that this has been worked on before, wondering about like in what order the student worked. I mean, it's a reminder of the amount of insight that you can gain from being with the student through the process. And sure, this tells us a ton, obviously, but there's so much in the process that has created this thing that includes the identity of the student in the classroom setting and all the background that you've been doing for methods and things like that. It's so incredibly valuable, but there's so much that we're missing just by getting a snapshot.
I like the group setting of commenting on the work because I felt it gave me the discipline to actually devote a certain amount of time to look at stuff to describe. Because if I'm doing it on my own, I'm just like, okay, next, moving on. But because there are other people around me, kind of like, okay, and that's what happened to me because I thought that, well, I was kind of seeing what I wanted to see. Yeah, but spending a little more time in it made me see new things. So I thought that was very valuable. That I couldn't have achieved on my own.
Starting off descriptive, I think, is unbelievably important and useful. I don't want to hear what you think. Just tell me what you're seeing. I think that's really helpful.
It's hard to keep it at that
It really
level.
is, yeah.
Especially for math. I was thinking, what does that describe for math? But actually there is so much to see.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm wondering, like, for me while we're like taking this class, like in what context would this sort of protocol be like executed and to like what aim?
It's different contexts, so like department meetings potentially, or staff PD to better understand a student. You might bring in work from different disciplines to get a better picture of the student, or it might be to better understand the assignment.
And if you heard of like critical friends groups, I think that like a collection of teachers that meet and do this kind of work. People know why this group is better.
What time is it?
Maybe we should say at the end.
Okay.
We'll tell you more.
Okay.
More about that.
Yeah.
But can you guys go?
Why we were selected?
No.
You guys were being
Let us tell you.
But actually, we're just quite keen to know how did you feel throughout the whole
Yeah.
process?
Yeah.
Were you uncomfortable? Were you
I'll say it's much easier given the fact that it's Samantha's student and her work. I feel much easier talking about this because I'm distanced from the actual. Does that make sense? It's not my.
I didn't know which way you were going with
No,
that.
it's not my. It's not my stuff, so I feel comfortable saying whatever.
Okay, no.
I'm not gonna get defensive. I'm not gonna.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I think also though there's the sense that it's more objective than it might be if it were your student, but it's certainly subjective. Right? Like even the small things that we're noticing, like the reason that I'm picking up on this comes from like who I am. And I think that's another thing to keep in mind. Is like we're trying as hard as possible to be objective, but it's not gonna happen.
Did you take this class already? That's what I'm reading through about. What do you guys feel like you learned though? What did you get out of? I guess that's what Are there things that you didn't like about the protocol?
Do you feel like it was a waste of time, valuable, no, for you?
I'm wondering, like, if I was a teacher engaging in this protocol and say, like, I taught this class, like, what am I taking away from it? For me, that's gonna, like, inform my instruction. To me, I'm not totally clear. And, like, we didn't, yeah, our conversation was pretty, like, meta and not very concrete. That's what I'm thinking.
I'm gonna piggyback that also. It might frustrate me a little bit to finish this process if it was my own student and not have a set of action items or like, okay, these are the areas I can improve. Like the conversation didn't really revolve around improving instruction. And so I don't know what to think about that.
I understand. I mean, I think I told you that at the beginning that we weren't trying to
Yeah,
get
I know.
suggestions.
And that-
I
yeah.
understand that tension though, and sometimes it's easier and we might want that. But were you all able, as a group, to get more out of it because we weren't aimed at Samantha?
Because
Were you, like, when you leave, were you taking more out of it because it wasn't all aimed at Samantha, you could do this could be improved specifically towards her? Did you feel like your group learning was improved or not? It might not have.
It's interesting because we're looking at student work without seeing like any example of instruction. So I don't know like if we could necessarily say at the end of this conversation after looking at the student work, oh, like Sam, you need to do this, this, and this. Because like I have no idea what Sam did. Like this is just like one example of student work and doesn't, you know, tell me very much about her instruction. I do think there is some general things that you could potentially take from looking at student work that are like potentially we could say, oh, well, that's really interesting. There's 2 layers to like showing and explaining, like 2 layers of logic. As a group of teachers, are we teaching students how to do that second layer? Is that something we want to teach? Like, can we now together develop a lesson to think about how we would teach students to explain their answers in words? I don't know. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, I think there are some places that you could go that would inform instruction that might not necessarily be aimed at SAM. Because I don't know if we could aim our conversation at SAM after just looking at one.
I think that's good. I mean, I think we were
Yeah,
trying to find
sure.
questions, and you're saying we found a question about
Yeah.
showing or explaining versus showing and explaining, and that would be a question moving forward that we didn't have when we walked in this room.
Sure, yeah.
I was thinking if I were in the shoes of the presenting teacher, I would be more comfortable if it was a setting where people were just looking at my students' work and commenting on it, because I kind of forgot that the presenting teacher was here just by, commenting
Yeah.
on the work. And if I were the presenting teacher and I felt that it was a judgment on my teaching and a group of about 5 or 6 of my colleagues looking at not the students' work but my teaching and how it's reflected in my students' work, I think the whole dynamics of the group and the learning would be very different.
Can I ask you how you felt during that? I mean, it might be different because you.
I was okay. I thought I was gonna be more nervous. I think I'd be more nervous if you guys walked in and were like, I'm just gonna grab something off your desk and whatever it is. Like, it's just a snapshot. Like, you don't know if I tried to teach something to that student. So I had been nervous because I felt like this was very procedural, and that didn't surface as much. Because like that's a concern I have, that like this is all procedural stuff. Like, does she actually understand what she's doing with that scoreboard thing? Like, we're not 100% sure. So that part I was nervous about. I think if that had come up, I would have felt really vulnerable, because that's just a concern I've always had as a teacher, balancing those two. But because I had selected this, I was a little bit more comfortable.
Do you think it like helps that, we're not, this isn't something that we ourselves have taught our students? Because I was thinking, like, I've been in like meetings where it's like, we're looking at one teacher's student work, but like all of us had our own students do that exact same piece of work, and then there's like, there's like an element of comparison. Do you think that would be different? Like, if we all had our own?
I think it would be. Do you think it would be for your disciplines?
I think so,
You think
yeah.
so?
Like, I think like when you're in this, like a setting where like, oh, everybody's looking at like your kid's essay and like they all know what their kids wrote in
And what
their
they
essay.
expect, yeah.
And they're like, oh, well, my kids do this always, you know, or whatever. I think that that's harder.
So you'd be more comfortable in this mixed, the fact that we taught different things. If you were gonna present some physics work, you might feel more comfortable in a mixed group.
Or like if it could be other physics teachers, but not like that they had the exact same piece of student work in their sitting in a pile in their classroom. Do you know what I mean? Like,
Mhm.
Like if you had all given out the same question.
yeah.
And you were bringing it, you would.
Right.
you'd be
So like
less
whenever I've participated in like student work protocols, that was the scenario. It's like we've all given this extended response, like sample question, and now we're gonna look at one teacher's sample extended response. So,
I think that also, I think there's also potential in that sort of heterogeneous group to have a ceiling on the complexity of what you're thinking about. And I think we came up, like you said, we came up with these sort of meta analyses of what we see going on. And I think if we're thinking about what the value was for the rest of us who aren't the teacher teaching this lesson, I will get a lot more out of that than I will with a group of people who are all teaching the same level, doing the same lesson. We might get very specific stuff from those people, but I think the input from people at all different levels and having those conversations that are really more about like the sort of underlying beliefs about student work and understanding and learning. I mean, really huge questions that came up in just an hour. I think those can be really valuable conversations for us to be in as teachers or admins that you might not get if you're all kind of at the same level.
yeah.
And so the math didn't prevent you from getting something valuable, you think? Because that was I will say my concern was that you wouldn't be able to see, that you'd be able to see much because it's math. And so I didn't know like if you would be able to find implications for yourself. And
Or
that's something I didn't want,
questions.
or questions, and like I didn't want, this wasn't about just me, it was supposed to be the group learning, and I was nervous that you guys wouldn't be able to. So I don't know if you can speak to that, like you just did a little bit.
Yeah, no, I think it's great. I mean, the more math it becomes and the more 7th grade math it becomes, the less engaged I am because that's further and further away from my universe. So being able to raise these larger questions about the ways in which we request information from students and what we do with what we get, those are questions that are seemingly universal.
So if you were sitting and we had presented you with AP calculus work, you might feel
Yeah.
you would look at it?
Well, I like it. I mean, I think there are potentially some sort of like alienating things, but knowing that we're all, and if I was the only one who wasn't from that world, that would be one thing. But I think if we're engaging in it in such a way that we're all sort of benefiting, because we're not just talking about like the pluses, the scoreboard, and whether that worked. We're talking about what it means to have these 3 different types of explanations, and that's something that I think crosses disciplines.
I'll jump in there and say though, it is absolutely necessary that I myself understand how to do all of these problems and have my own strategies. So if it were AP Calc, took AP Calc a long time ago, but if it were AP Calc, I would feel much more confused. I would have sat back and waited to see where the conversation was going to go. Some level of expertise was necessary.
Thank you. I want to be respectful of time. We have a short reflection that we would appreciate if you guys could just write a few things. You can feel free to continue talking while you write. I just thank you so much for your time. Oh, and we should explain. So, question number 2 says, do you feel the group composition? So that doesn't mean I was with Sarah, this group composition was awful or great. But we mean
Generally make groups worse. So
if you
want to say that, that's okay.
as you guys start to pick up, you are a heterogeneous group. Our next one will not be. So we're curious if things are going to be different. If it's positive like that, it's you're heterogeneous, or if it's negative that it's not your discipline. It's all these people from different disciplines. So that's what we mean by group composition. And I'll stop being leading.
No, you're fine.
As I'm talking.
You're fine.
Please be honest, by the way, too.
Yeah, and you can
Like,
say
if-
negative things
Yeah.
about this.
We're not gonna be, I'm not offended by anything.
No.
I can handle it. I wrote it down.
Next question, do you guys ever talk about like student work protocols in connection with like classroom observations or?
There are other protocols that are more aimed at problem solving or trouble, or like improving a lesson.
Uh-huh.
This is like not this class, but that's kind of what I do. There's a rubric for looking at instruction,
Right,
for Heather Hill for math quality.
so that involves like also looking at student work.
So it doesn't, at least not yet, we try to,
Mhm.
and it's, I don't know if it'll go there.
Uh-huh.
I think there's a lot of value in that.
Right, I think,
I think
Yeah.
it should go there.
yeah, it's
But right now,
interesting.
things are separate.
Yeah, it's interesting to me to do the student work evaluation separate from classroom instruction.
We'll take everything back from you, and you guys can take more pizza on your way out, so thank you.
And we're supposed to thank Samantha for presenting her work.
Thanks, Sam.
Thanks for giving me the space too. Appreciate it. Okay,
Okay, all set.
Thank you so much, guys.
really, and take more pizza.
You just wrote down my paper for us.
You just. Yep.
That was awesome. Cool. And yes, take a lot of